Power Siphon of the Archmage Ballista is by far the best Twin Divine build I've played and has exceeded my expectations in every way. It is the fastest mapper that I've actually tested thus far, the easiest bosser to play, and has the most diverse opportunities to scale at the higher end. Now this build isn't an entirely new concept, having been played at various setups to this point, but I believe my combination of items and setups at this budget point is insanely effective, and it should come obviously as no surprise that a skill gem that inherently combines two of the strongest meta starters, Archmage and Power Siphon, performs at such a high level. Beyond the flat damage provided by the gem, which is around 2k for my character, my build is also able to really effectively leverage Indigon, due to a mix of spell damage applying to wand attacks inherently with a skill gem, and also really high mana regen provided by Ritual of Awakening when using 6 totems, and some pretty clever choices as far as rare gearing goes, but we'll get into that later. It is actually the details of this build, in my opinion, that make it exceedingly strong, since the core setup has already been explored in various different ways and is creeping its way into the meta over the course of the league. While many people opt to rapidly place totems though to push the scaling for Indigon, I instead use an Unearth linked with Archmage support to quickly spend mana when needed. This way my totems don't need to constantly rearm, which loses a lot of damage uptime, and I'm also using a fast casting spell, which is Unearth, while also fulfilling one condition for Bastion of Hope. And this leads me to my defensive setup for this build. It's fairly meta, but I opt for Bastion of Hope as my pair of Forbidden Jewels, in large part due to how cheap they were at just under 2 divines for the pair. They provide 25% spell and attack block, synergizing fantastically with the super meta shields Fallen. In addition to my block-based setup, the high mana of Hierophant synergizes particularly well with Sanctuary of Thought, giving a ton of flat ES. I also here then grab Zealot's Oath, which turns my life regen into ES regen, pair that with Doppelganger Guise to give solid recovery when hit, and this further supplements regen already from Ritual of Awakening. An Unnatural Instinct at Silent Start provides a ton of useful stats, but it also includes more attack block, so that means I don't really need to build more block elsewhere. Svalin also automates my Sigil of Power, which is really nice to have, and 2 offensive supporting skills in Hydrosphere and Lightning Golem. So even though I'm playing at 0 spell suppression, this character is still actually completely deathless, despite completing Ubers, T17s, farming a ton of delirious content, and more. There's a ton of other tech I really want to talk about in this build, so let's dive into the POV properly. First things first, this tree has been done several times over now, but it's just another Archmage tree, but there are some slight changes. Firstly, I choose not to run any Timeless Jewel at all. I don't really like Militant Faith on here because reduced cost not important. Increased damage doesn't really do anything because Indigon provides so much increased damage. So, and then Glorious Vanity Doriani I think is kind of not great because I actually want most of my damage just to be going straight to my ES, so I don't have to worry about class management too much as far as mana and life recovery go. I'm doing a lot of pathing up top, and my actual average hit is huge because of Indigons. This Lightning Mastery is crazy. Even on Ubers, I'm getting about 30% shock, which is pretty insane. I have a cluster set over here, and this is probably where the biggest divergence happens. I also skip Arcane Capacitor, but anyways, I'm running a Light Up Meaning mana here. This is one of the more expensive items in the build. This is 2.7 divines, I think, and I actually put the Natural Instinct down here instead of the other way around. This is partly because I don't need cast speed, I don't need AoE, so Unnatural here is bad, but I do really like things like movement speed, extra res, I don't mind losing the proj damage here, and then the intentional attack block is really great, and also getting a single totem node isn't, horrible to have, some placement speed, some duration. It's really, really nice because I don't replace my totems. I also grab Unwavering Stance. Unlike Archmage setups of League Start that go Grace and Evasion, I'm playing Svalin, and so Unwavering is really nice. And this, when paired with Period of Elements, lets me run different Pantheons, which is really great. It means I can even skip crit immunity when I want to do things like Simulacrum, right? I just take, the Gorgon instead. So that's really cool. I think more than this, it's fairly specced out for ICF4. Skill gems. So the skill gems are actually more flexible than you'd think. There's only a few mandatory things, and the flexibility I'm actually trying to make use of by, putting this setup in this Fallen, which I've already mentioned. In my other weapon, I'm running my Precision, Arrogance, Clarity. I was running Vitality earlier when I was using a cheaper Watcher's Eye, but I bought a 1.9 Divine Watcher's Eye, I think, that actually went double Clarity, so I dropped Vitality entirely. Period of Elements is linked with Eternal Blessing, and then I already mentioned the Unearthed Archmage setup. I manually cast Sniper's Mark, and then I run a Fast Attack Shield Charge Frostwing setup. I think this is so much better than playing Frostwing Wintry Blast, just because it's much less clunky. It's just so quick. And also, Shield Charge is how I'm fulfilling the second condition for Bastion of Hope. Since actually placing your totems doesn't count as you attacking, so you don't get the attack block from that. Arcane Cloak is here, linked to more duration, Arcane Surge and Automation, fairly standard, and then finally my Power Siphon links. Whatever's the best damage links, you just go for them. I couldn't really afford Awaken Wed, but that is what it is. Return Proj is actually really, really sick. It's obviously a more damage multiplier as long as you have at least one source of pierce or more. But I think that this just helps your clear out immensely because it gives you infinite pierce on the way back. And with Power Siphon, with the multi-proj, it's just absolutely insane for clear. Even though this is a totem build, I was completing my deli. I was able to hit 7 reward deli every single beach in like 50 seconds, which is, you know, 20-30% faster than any other build I've played for that so far. Just because of how responsive the damage is, just because of infinite pierce, that sort of thing. Items is where this build gets the most interesting. I already mentioned Fallen. Indigon is insane. I personally believe that the increased cost of skills, you want to get that to be as high as possible. I was having trouble spending mana in different ways with different setups, although Unearth Archmage helps us out a lot. The 25% spell damage for each 200 mana is the most important mod. Look to maximize that. Doppelganger is fairly self-explanatory. And then Relicash. Relicash for my build isn't actually that great. It gives me max endurance charges. That's pretty much it. Originally, I was playing with a self-cast or self-attack frenzy setup linked to power charge on crit, and as long as I hit things, you know, I'm at crit cap. And even though I do take Ancestral Bond, you can still do things like crit enemies. It's just that crit strike will do no damage. So you actually have really easy access to frenzy generation and power charge generation. But because I'm lazy and because I didn't want to actually find better boots to gear with, like, man, getting T1 life, mana would be so much stronger. But I opted for Alakesh here. It's also because I'm using Bastion jewels. Different setups also go for like Conviction of Power, and then they'll get like jewels for Ritual Awakening, or jewels for Sanctuary, or jewels for Conviction, you know, one of the 3 combinations. But I really like going Bastion of Power, just because I think that source of block is more efficient. Probably, maybe. That's that. And then Foible is, you know, self-explanatory mana builds. Remus is a mapping flask for me. I don't really know what to run for my flasks. So you can see it's pretty scuffed, because I already have Perma Onslaught from the Cluster Jewel. Light of Meaning Mana, one of the more expensive items on the build. Unnatural Instinct, same diff here. And then a double Clarity Watchers. I'm fairly fortunate to have this. I would really prioritize that mana recovery rate more than anything. I realized that the recover 10% on mana isn't actually that crazy, especially since I'm using Unearth Archmage now. So passive recovery is really what I want to optimize for. Bastion Jewels, then a Healthy Mind here is also fairly standard as far as Archmage builds go, especially on softcore. But yeah. The rare items are much more interesting. Let's talk about the jewels first. So the large cluster is kind of stock standard. The only thing I really care about is having Scintillating Idea on one of the lead-ins. I mean, I would rather this be something else. Widespread actually sucks horribly, but Scintillating is important, and it's what I want here. And then I run the medium, and this plays Sleepless Centuries and Ancestral Echo. If you want to self-craft this, I think Reforged Speed is like a 1 in 50 or something to hit, or maybe like 1 in 100. I don't know. Fairly common, though. And then finally, I run a jewel. PS Archmage is different than PS. PS Archmage actually does have a lightning tag, so you can actually look for things like crit multi with lightning skills, crit multi with elemental skills, that sort of thing. And it's really good because I only have 465 crit multi on this. I don't play like Marylians like I did in my League starter, right? My last jewel is a Searching Eye. I'm just a little short on Chaos Res on this character just because, you know, how the gearing turned out. Belts, I self-crafted this with just Chaos Essence, I think Envy. I'm happy to settle for whatever, just need to res cap. And let's talk about the last 4 pieces of gear. Firstly, there's this wand. On the wand, things I don't care about. Increased damage, because Indigon is already giving me so much. Flat damage, because PS Archmage has 2,000 base with like 7.5k mana. You know, it's already insane. So what I do care about is attack crit. So generic crit chance, attack speed, because ballistas do inherit your attack speed to some degree. And then maximum mana. Having the open prefix at the end was for pen, and then I saw mana regen as just a free floating mod on this thing. It was super cheap to buy, but also not that hard to self-craft if you start with the Fracture. Gloves. Gloves are an interesting slot. Only for the implicit. You do need to look for like Pierce, but I think as far as the Exarch side goes, I want to say that Intimidate. The other option is to go for Rage Generation. And if you're playing with a self-cast Power Siphon or a self-cast Frenzy, a self-cast attack, you can actually generate rage quite easily. It is a little bit more clunky to play, but you are playing Totems, which is a passive play style. I ended up not really wanting to do this because I wanted to just automate as much as possible. I felt that I did have enough character power, even when challenging Uber bosses, even when doing T17s. Mapping-wise, though, I would say that a rage generation feels really good, especially if you play, like, let's say Frenzy linked with Power Charge on Crit linked with Return Projectiles. Feels absolutely amazing. The 2 rings are the last 2 pieces of gear, and these things were awesome. Reflected Jewelry is really cheap to buy this patch, especially if you don't look for res on it at all. Each of these was, I think this was 10C, this was like under 100 chaos, somewhere around that range, but you can get a ton of mana regen, a ton of flat, and you can see that these 2 rings alone bring me from 2k to almost 3.5k mana regen. It's insane, and this regen is directly correlating with, you know, this mana spent recently. I think in the endgame POB that I had spec'd out for this, once I had my like levels and things allocated properly, I was at about 4k mana regen. But I think this, in combination with the mana mastery that I'm taking here, my clarity of Watcher's Eye, and also the mana flask, more often than not I can push towards, you know, the 16k, the full spent, as far as Indigon's battery goes. But I think this is really great. It's one of the reasons I don't use, you know, the normal my include on every single build anathema. I just think this is absolutely awesome, and it's one of the best ways to go about this. So before I end this video, I want to talk briefly about how I might think about scaling this into the end game. I have a POB from last league that was for a Power Siphon Archmage build. I think it might have been a Locust Mine setup. But one of the cool things with PS of Archmage that I want to note is that you actually can reserve your mana. So unlike other things that use unreserved mana, like Archmage itself, PS Archmage actually deals lightning damage equal to your max mana, which is really cool. If you choose to reserve your mana, it makes something like Radiant Faith super powerful. If you look to build a pure CI setup late game with PS Archmage and grab Radiant Faith Jewels and also use Sanctuary of Thought, a build like that can easily hit 15 to 20k ES without any problem at all. I think that's a really strong option to think about. It also lets you reserve all your flat auras onto your life, since you have, or onto your mana rather, instead of using Arrogance, because you have so much, you know, flat mana, right? And then I think running a full aura setup can be really good, especially if you're, you know, thinking about conversion setups for this league, whether that's like, you know, the Purity of Fire Sublime stuff maybe. I guess that wouldn't work with that, but there's a lot of other ways to do that. But that is the sort of the key core defensive thing, point one I think of. If you're going for that setup, I also wouldn't go Indigon, because you're reserving your mana in that case, right? What you probably would do instead is play dual wield wands, which would be really nice, and then switch this out for Wilma's. And then obviously like numbers aren't reflective of anything. And then the nice thing about Wilma's with wands is that when you're playing Wilma's with wands, you can use this thing, right? Torment, which gives you both attack and cast speed and damage. It's just absolutely insane. It double dips with Wilma's. It's really strong. So that's one of the setups that you could like possibly think about if you're looking to push this into the end game, you know, Mage Blood and all. You could also look to mirror what Archmage characters are doing in general, just Mage Blood, mana stack, Indigon though, with this character. And that's also really cool late game. I probably wouldn't do Bastion. And I'm also not a fan of Svala necessarily in the late game. I do think that suppress capping on this is more than reasonable. Shield this patch can actually roll a ton of block chance. If you like take a random shield here, let's take a Crusader Buckler, let's say. There's actually this chance to block mod, and you can actually get a 47 attack block on this shield alone with, like, you know, not too much thought, which is actually already really crazy. And that means it's much easier to get things like suppression. You're already pathing pretty close to Mage Bane over here, 2-point reflexes, that sort of thing, and then re-gearing in that general form to be much more safe on bosses actually than Svalin even is, especially if you're thinking about playing HC. So yeah, those are the two core ideas I'm thinking about scaling this forward. And this is actually one of the 20 Divine builds, which I might actually not just stop at and actually scale further. The next build I have is really interesting. I realized that it's actually based on something that doesn't reflect in POB, so I guess I'll have to let local identity know about my next build and the probably intended interaction that it has, I think.